almost all interviewing has gone virtual. So we wanted to set you up for success as you get ready for your interviews. And let's go through a little bit in the slide deck. So a little background about me. I head up alumni career and professional development at Kellogg. I've done a lot of coaching at Harvard Business School, UCLA Anderson, and Kellogg as well. I've worked in private equity. Probably the most important things to know about me: I'm a diehard Red Sox fan, a Jeopardy champion, and my go-to ice cream is coffee, cookies, and cream at JP Licks in Boston. So the agenda, we're going to go through some of the topics to keep in mind when you're getting ready for your virtual interviews. And you can see them here, but we're starting with kind of, we're all producers now, location, 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 going all the way through practice, practice, practice. You can see I repeat things 3 times when they're really important. Okay, a brief recap of the last 6 months. So this was probably beginning of last March. Things were normal, people were together, and then this happened, and then that happened, and then this inexplicably happened. I think I'm actually the only person in the US who hasn't actually watched Tiger King yet. This was me a couple weeks ago, though I've cleaned up for the webinar. And this might be you right now. You might be home with extended family, with parents, with siblings, roommates, and the house might be a little crowded right now. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, so job interviews have gone virtual in response to COVID. And what's interesting is this was a trend that was already starting. A lot of companies were starting to do screening interviews, first round interviews virtually, whether it's using things like HireVue or Skype or Zoom or Teams. And the pandemic has really only increased it. So according to Handshake, 89% of employers are adopting or increasing virtual interviews. And it might even be a little higher right now. 73% of employers are adopting or increasing phone screens. And 59% are using digital engagement, virtual events, networking, or even platforms like HireVue, where you might do your interviews on there. And even a year ago, I was coaching, a couple of students in college, and some of the investment banks were already putting super days onto virtual platforms already. So it had already started in some respects. So tip number 1, we're all producers now. And I really want you to come away with that mindset that when you're getting ready for your virtual interviews, we're all producers. One of my friends is actually a producer. She's been a news producer for a number of years for NBC, for CBS. And she's been used for years to essentially being a one-person shop, having to go out when she's doing stories, and whether it's filming them, asking questions, doing lighting, downloading them, editing them. And we're all kind of producers now. And essentially, we're all kind of one-man bands, whether that's location, staging, sound, lighting, wardrobe, technical support, content, rehearsing, performing. That's the mindset, I really want all of us to be in, because when you're getting ready for your virtual interviews, you really want to set yourself up for success. And so you've really got to take ownership of all of these things. Tip number 2, location, location, location. And what I mean by that is we're probably all doing this from home. I'm actually doing this from my office/bedroom. It's LA, it's a small place. Some of you may be living with family right now, or roommates or friends. And so one of the most important things is, can you find a quiet room that's well lit when you're getting ready for your virtual interview? Can you encourage parents, siblings, friends to give you some space? I mean, 1, you need it just for the quiet, but 2, you also really need it just so you're relaxed and at your best. I mean, even if someone's quiet, but you don't know if they're going to barge into your room, it just gives you that little bit more confidence, which you might need. Find a room that has carpeting or an area rug, which will really cut down on echoes. So I've got carpeting here in the room that I'm doing this in. It helps cut down on echoes. Shut windows to cut down on outside noise. So my sliding glass door is open right now, otherwise it gets hot in here. But one thing I've always got to watch out for if I'm on a call, doing an interview, doing a webinar, is that garbage truck frequently comes around at challenging times. Find a neutral colored wall behind you with no clutter so the interview isn't distracted. Otherwise, you may want to use a virtual background. So I'm actually using a virtual background, and I'll talk a little bit more about virtual backgrounds. I like this. This is actually the lobby of our business school building at Kellogg. So it looks pretty professional. It's not too distracting. There's not a lot of color going on. It's mostly white with a little bit of brown. In general, just a neutral colored background is probably best. The other thing that becomes really important is just checking your internet bandwidth for the interview. You want to encourage other people to avoid streaming when you're interviewing. I've got a lot of friends right now where everyone's home. It's my friend, it's his wife, it's their 2 kids, and it can get tough if you're on a Zoom call and someone else is watching a video or other things. So again, helpful to get people out of the house, or at least tell them, hey, I'm on this interview from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Could you please not stream any videos? The other thing as well, when you think about that location, get close to a wireless router or even connect directly. And what's interesting is I do a lot of webinars, and when there's not a pandemic, we actually have a great studio. We'll go down to the studio, we'll have a whole technical support team there. It's 3, 4 people that are filming it. I'm really well lit. We're doing it. It's very professional. That's not the case right now. And when I was starting to do this from home, the first thing our IT team said was, you may want to hardwire in. I said, well, I'm just like 3 feet from my router, so it shouldn't make a difference. And one of the things they told me, they said, you'll actually have, I think they said it was a 25 times better connection if I hardwire in. And so I took their advice. In fact, I didn't even have an Ethernet input on my Lenovo ThinkPad, so I had to get an adapter to put it in. And they said, much, much better quality ever since I made that. Now, you may not always have the ability to do that depending on where your internet is coming through, but something to think about just to maximize your video. Okay, tip number 3, your background. And I started to talk a little bit about this already, but it becomes really important. This is probably not the background you want for your interview. Not a good background to use. This is a really nice background. I probably couldn't afford this background, but you can. In fact, you can download this background for free. So a little bit more about that background. You essentially want the interview to focus on you. You don't want what's behind you to distract from the interview. And in particular, it's always good to double check that. You don't want beer bottles behind you, other things that they're going to start reading. So, make sure you kind of think about where you're going to do this and make sure that your background is all set up. Neutral colors, white, off-white, gray are best. Consider a virtual background, but here's the important thing is test it first. It doesn't always work on all video conference platforms. Like it doesn't, I haven't quite figured out how to use it on Teams. I'm very comfortable using it on Zoom and some other platforms. So 1, test it out, make sure it's good. 2, the other thing that's really important on that virtual background is it's important that lighting is consistent and objects are at a similar distance, or you'll see that it's not working really well. So that's important as well. Downloading a free West Elm virtual background is faster and cheaper than a home makeover. There's the URL, or if you just Google West Elm backgrounds. And that was the background we had here on the previous page, which looks a little bit more professional than that background. But play with that. That's something you want to do ahead of your interview so that you're comfortable with it and you're at your best. Okay, lighting. Lighting is really important. You really want to be well lit when you're doing an interview. And so something to keep in mind, it doesn't have to cost a ton of money. I bought a $9 swing lamp at IKEA that's lighting me right now. To the right, you see a much more expensive ring light, which has actually come down in price. If you look at some of them on Amazon, they're actually not that expensive. I don't think you need a ring light. Just a quick swivel lamp is great, where you can adjust the lighting. Biggest thing, you cannot be a silhouette. So you really don't want to have a window behind you with light streaming in and you're backlit. That's not going to be good. Let me just show you a quick thing. If I just turn off my light here, look at the difference already, just with a $9 light. Here's the light on, here's it off. Again, makes a huge difference in terms of how you're lit. So front lighting is critical. Again, it doesn't have to be expensive. Optimal lighting is, can you get like a halogen up lamp in front of you, which I do have. So that sort of lights the room evenly, which is great. And then optimal would essentially be two lamps, desk lamps or swing lamps on both sides to reduce the shadows. I haven't done that. So I just have one coming directly on. So there may be a little bit more shadows here. But if you can get two, you're going to be much more evenly lit. And here's like a little bit of diagram. And again, this is more complicated than what you would need, but you can see the person's, the laptop is in front of them and they've got two lights on either side to fill in the main. You wouldn't need the backlights, which are labeled number 4, even the backdrop number 5, but you really want those two lamps if you can to light it evenly. Okay, audio. Use this like your earbuds, not that your overhead ones. With the overhead ones, it's a little distracting. It doesn't quite look as professional. So I don't really like that for an interview. I just don't think it works very well. So earbuds are great. Try to avoid the overhead earphones. Typically, your laptop microphone and speakers are fine to use. I think for 95% of the people out there who are interviewing, that's what they're using. One thing which I might recommend, which I'm actually using today, is an external lapel mic, which is even better. What's nice is it gets closer to your voice. It's just, maybe 6 inches from my mouth. Super cheap. You can buy it on Amazon for $19 and, super quick to plug in. I like it because you project a little bit better. The voice quality is a little bit better. When I'm doing a webinar, I'm probably about 2-ish feet from my laptop microphone. And so this just makes it a little bit easier. The one big caveat, again, when using any sort of external equipment, whether it's an external microphone or a webcam, is really test it out. I mean, make sure you've got the latest version of technology on there. Test it out, reboot your computer. Do this a couple times. You don't want to be surprised when you're getting ready for an interview and it's saying your microphone isn't working. Technology, and we'll go into this a little bit more here. So use this, not that. Use your laptop when you're on a virtual interview. Don't use your phone. There's so much more functionality on your laptop, particularly with a Zoom platform, with Teams, and with other things. Easier to share things, share your screen. You might have documents you may want to share, who knows what. But you're going to have many more things and just easier interface to use if you're using a laptop versus a phone. So again, you're going to have full functionality on your laptop. Other thing, download the latest versions of Zoom, Skype, Teams, and again, restart your computer. So if it needs to update, it doesn't turn off. The worst thing you could do in the world is suddenly you've got an interview, you're signing on, and your computer says, I need to reboot up to update it. You don't want that to happen. So make sure that you do that ahead of time. And just what I said earlier, make sure that you granted microphone, app, camera permissions to everything. There's a lot of integration that goes on with Zoom, and you just want to make sure that everything's integrated. Just what I said before, be close to your router. Consider a hardwired connection. Raise your laptop so that the webcam is at eye level. I'm not quite there right now. I should have put some books underneath to stack it up a little bit higher. If you look at a lot of correspondence, again, it's not super expensive. They'll put, books underneath to stack it up. I actually have a standing desk converter. I'm standing when I do webinars or interviews, and I'm going to talk more about that in a little bit. Again, a standing desk converter, very inexpensive on Amazon. They vary in price from, I think the least expensive one might be $30, then go up to $150, but that can help as well. Look into the webcam and make the Zoom window small and centered just below the webcam. And I'll show you some examples of this. And I still struggled. A lot of times you'll see my eyes kind of reading the content on the PowerPoint versus just looking into the webcam. Now I'm looking into the webcam because I'm conscious of it. but I'll talk a little bit about how you might make that Zoom window small enough and centered to really increase your eye contact. Again, test your technology, then test it again. Plug in, or make sure you have a lot of battery life. These, Zoom programs and using video takes up a lot of battery life, and you don't want to suddenly run out. So a big recommendation about plugging in when possible. So this is typically what you might see in a Zoom interview, where you see, both yourself and the person who's interviewing you on the left and right. Now, the problem with this is when I look at the interviewer, which I might do, or at myself, at Regina or me, so you can see right now, I'm looking at Regina and I'm clearly not looking at the webcam up here. And it's very natural that I might be looking at her when I'm speaking or looking at me, and then I'm looking a little bit away. And so that's a problem. When you go with a full-size Zoom window, you forget to be looking at the webcam. And so one thing I really recommend is make it smaller. I'll often just minimize it or make it smaller. So now if I'm looking at Regina here, it's not a big difference for my eyes to travel up from Regina to the webcam. And even if I forget to look at the webcam, it still looks like I'm looking at the webcam. So one of the things I'm a big fan of is, make that Zoom window smaller to just make it easier to keep looking at the webcam. In fact, one of the things that you could do here, which I've done a little bit, behind it I have a Word document up where I kind of talk through some of the big themes that I want to get across during the interview, whether it's teamwork, leadership, analytical, curiosity, hard work, tenacity, multitasking. So that can be like a quick reminder. You don't want to have a lot of notes when you're doing a virtual interview, but you can kind of leave that up almost as a little bit of a background to just remind you, have I kept pushing those themes across? Okay, wardrobe. And I know, look, wardrobe is tough, particularly during a pandemic. I think I've only been wearing basketball shorts for the last 6 months, and I'm wearing basketball shorts now, if you want the truth. Okay, here's the thing. It is still an interview, even if it's virtual. And so it is important to dress up. I'm a big fan of dressing up half a step more than what you think is necessary. Expectations vary by industry. So certain industries, consulting and banking, are a little bit more dressed up, certainly than like a tech startup, or maybe even pharma, which isn't quite as formal. Avoid patterned shirts or suits. They don't typically show up well on video interviews, virtual interviews. So whenever I do a webinar, our IT team will always coach me. Usually they'll tell me to avoid white, so I'll typically wear a light blue shirt like this, but I do try to avoid stripes. I try to avoid checks. Same thing if I'm wearing a jacket, I might do a solid colored blue jacket. So it's interesting, I just actually had a virtual meeting, and I essentially was wearing the same blue shirt and just a blue jacket, and that was the right way to dress. The person I was meeting was a little bit more formal as well. I was dressed perfectly. I was sort of debating a tie. Didn't really need a tie, but the jacket was really helpful. The other thing as well, it's okay to ask how people usually dress in the office. I find, I do a lot of executive coaching, and I show up at companies. I just ask. And what was really interesting, I was showing up for a meeting with one of my clients in Dallas about a year ago, and it was on a Friday. And I actually asked the assistant, I said, how do people dress? I'd never been in their office before. And she said, I'm so glad you asked. She said, we've gone to more informal. And she said, and particularly on a Friday, she said, most of the people you're going to be meeting, they might be wearing jeans and a button-down shirt or a polo shirt. So I didn't want to dress down that much. So I wore, nice slacks, a nice shirt, but, didn't wear a suit, didn't wear a tie. And that sort of felt like the right amount to dress up. Okay. We live in an ADD world. We're always juggling and doing multiple things at the same time. And so it becomes really important to dismiss distractions so you're at your best during the virtual interview. It's important, like no emails, prompts, or buzzes coming in during the interview. So one of the things that I did before the webinar today is I closed out several of my email accounts so I wouldn't have prompts coming in at the bottom that are going to distract me. Because if I see the prompt coming in, my eyes are going to go there and I'm going to, lose my train of thought. I use Outlook. I put that in offline mode when I'm doing a webinar or an interview. I silence my cell phone. You might even want to put your cell phone away, but I definitely silence it or turn it off. Close out all other apps and windows. And again, it gets to a little bit of bandwidth as well. Sign out of email so you don't receive any alerts. Put your mobile phone out of reach. Again, parents, siblings, roommates, dogs, they can be distractions as well. They need to go outside for a little bit. The other thing as well, don't take notes on your laptop. Even if you're writing down notes during the interview, it's distracting to be typing. The interviewer might think you're multitasking and doing something else. So you definitely don't want to be typing anything in the laptop during the interview. And I think it's okay to tell the interviewer, I'm just going to be jotting down some notes in a notebook. So if I'm looking away, I'm just taking notes. You don't want to take a lot of notes, but it may be a quick thing like, remember to bring up the story about how I, led the defensive unit to do X, Y, Z. So let them know about that. Okay, the other thing, I'm a huge fan of standing up whenever you're doing a virtual interview. I think it gives you a lot more energy. Your voice projects so much better as well. So I'm a big fan. So I bought a standing desk converter. In part, I was sitting too much during the pandemic, so I thought it would be healthier just to be standing more during the day. They sort of say sitting is the new smoking. So that's been a good thing. But particularly when I do a webinar, I always want to stand. I remember I was doing the first webinar, we were in the studio, and they'd set up a seat, and I said, I really want to be standing for the webinar. And they said, it's an hour, you can't really be standing. I said, I can, and I want to. Your energy is better, your voice is better. Again, standing desk converters are real cheap. The one caveat, only stand up if you're comfortable. So you may want to practice doing that because, a half hour, 45 minutes can feel like a long time. Probably not a great thing if it's a consulting interview and you've got to be writing things down. You may want to be sitting for that. But in general, I'm a big fan of standing up. And I can't emphasize this enough, practice, practice, practice. Practice makes you really good. Almost all of you were athletes. And how do you get good as an athlete? You practice, practice, practice. And it's no different for interviews, whether they're virtual or in person. Practice so you're comfortable with this technology and your answers. Do a mock interview. I'm a huge fan of doing mock interviews, doing practice interviews. Practice with the technology. So whether it's a friend on Zoom or just even recording yourself on your iPhone is great. Do your company research, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. Most people do a terrible job of doing company research. And I think that's something that can really differentiate you from other people. Write your questions ahead of time and have them with you. So if you have questions for the interviewer, for the company, I'm a big fan of writing them down ahead of time. And again, if a candidate said, hey, I jotted down a few questions and I see them looking down, my takeaway is I'm impressed. I'm impressed that they took the time, that they're prepared, that they've been thoughtful about it. I think it's great. You can have a few notes in front of you, but it's maybe like a little note card that's, up against your screen, but nothing more. You can't be flipping through papers in an interview. Timeliness is really interesting. In the real world, I would tell everyone, drive to that building and get to that building like, half an hour or more before your interview. I live in LA. You never know what traffic's going to be like. So half an hour still may not leave you enough time. In a Zoom world, it's harder because that person may have another meeting that goes right up until the interview. So being on time for a virtual interview, I would just say it might be just a minute early or 2 minutes early at most, because that interviewer may have back-to-back meetings and they may not have enabled their waiting room. I finally started, enabling my waiting room on Zoom a few months ago because it was a little awkward sometimes when people broke in. They may not have done it, so you don't want to get on there too early. Last thing, get familiar with the HireVue platform. You may have to do some Some of your interviews may start with you recording video answers to a couple of questions. Like JP Morgan uses this a lot. And usually you get like 2 tries to record an answer. So you want to get familiar with that as well. Couple more things before we wrap up. I want everyone going into that interview having created an agenda. Your preparation. I hope you've done some informational interviewing, maybe some networking. You've worked on your elevator pitch, your resume is down pat, your sell sheet. What are kind of the 5 big qualities or traits that you're going to communicate to me? You've kind of read their LinkedIn, so you know a bit about who's going to be interviewing them. And then you've read through the job description. You know the company details, the qualifications, responsibilities. You've done your company research. And I want you walking in with an agenda. What are the things you want to get across? What are the skills? What are the experiences? You really are, in the end, you're building a bridge. You're kind of building a bridge from your skills and your experiences to their needs and their requirements. When you research the company, try to understand what the industry trends are. Let's say I had an interview with Disney. I might want to know what's going on with Disney. How is Disney Plus going and the streaming? How many people were signed up? How are they releasing movies in a virtual world? Company background, what's happening with Bob Iger, who's going to succeed him, what's kind of been the recent news, what's happening with the theme parks. If you think about Disney as a company, there's the studios, there's ABC and television production, there's cruise lines, there's theme parks, there's the ESPN. You really want to kind of be up on the whole company in the background. Products and market share, you can see how well movies have done. What's their market share? How much did they gross? Customers, channels, and partners, you should know that. Who are their competitors? Who are the biggest competitors of Disney? Is it Sony? Is it Warner Brothers? Do a quick SWOT analysis of the company. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What are their opportunities and threats? Financial overview, whether it's share price, market cap, growth, investors, funding. And again, look up people you're going to be speaking with on LinkedIn. Going deeper on research, try their products. If their products are in the store, if you're interviewing with Disney, sign up for 1 month free of Disney Plus and see what it's like to stream. How much Marvel content is there versus Pixar versus other stuff? Visit their stores if it's safe. Interview customers. I was once coaching someone who was interviewing for a job with a baby stroller company, and not during the pandemic, and he was doing a lot of customer interviews in the stores. Why were they buying certain baby strollers? What were they looking for? Informational interviews, whether it's in your alumni directory or LinkedIn. And again, write out your questions ahead of time. And then one thing I want to just close on, because I know we're coming up on time. When you read a job application like this, and so this is a job description for a clinical sales rep at AbbVie, and you can see a little bit about what they're looking for. Ability to work independently and in a team setting, well-developed written and oral communications, applies a range of traditional, build rapport and relationships. I want people to read the job description really closely, and then when you go in, start to think through, okay, how do I talk about these really important things? Working independently and in a team setting, written and oral communication skills, improving performance. You probably have done that as an athlete, building rapport and relationships, organizational skills for speaker programs. So talk through how you've done a lot of these, because that's going to be important in the interview, talking through some of the things that you've done. Think through universal skills, leadership, communications, team orientation, analytical skills, writing skills, taking initiative, problem solving, multitasking, hard work. And then use the SAR method, situation, action, result. Set up the story, pull in the interviewer, show the action, and finally show the result. Use data to show your results. So here's, a situation. I was the defensive captain on a Division III football team at Colby. That's the situation. The action, I led by example. By doing double workouts in the off season, I worked closely with the defensive coordinator and led our defense on the field. What was the result? Here I'm quantifying. We had the 3rd best defense in Division III, and we won our conference. And that's going to be important. And essentially, I want you to sort of build a sell sheet like this. So at the top, as you've looked through that job description, what are the main things, the main themes or needs that they're looking for? Whether it's communications, focus, analytical skills, teamwork, ownership, leadership. and then put stories together for each of those themes. Okay, I know we're at time right now, so let's stop there for a minute. And let me see if you guys have any questions. So if anyone wants to type in the Q&A box any questions as you're getting ready for your virtual interviews that we can help with, type it into the Q&A box right now. Here's one. What should you do if the interview's connection seems to be going in and out? That's a great question. And it happens. It happens all the time. I think, the most important thing is stay calm. Things are always going to go wrong, whether it's connectivity or the interviewer not being attuned. And you always have to be ready for that. And so the most important thing is to stay calm. And then the next important thing is, see if it gets better or not. If it doesn't, you may want to type into the chat box, let me know if there's a number I can call you at, because at least you'll have the audio. You could still stay on for the video, but you'll have the audio. And that can be helpful. And so always kind of get ready to call them ahead of time. You may even want to ask for a number ahead of time if they're comfortable, but that's important. And the calm part is really important. Things are always going to go wrong. So one of the first times I was doing a webinar, I was on the alumni board at Harvard, and I was doing our first webinar. We were in a production studio. We'd finally found a really good space to do the webinar. And the night before was a huge blizzard, and they decided to cancel school. The next day, the university was closed. But the production team was great. They said, you know what, we know we've been working towards this webinar for a while. We're going to come in anyways. We're going to go ahead and do the webinar. And so anyways, I'm doing the webinar. Everything's going great. And we've got 15 minutes left. We're in the studio, and the loudspeaker comes on in the library saying the library is going to be closing in 15 minutes due to the blizzard. And clearly you could hear it. It's broadcasting loud and clear. I couldn't kind of lose it at that point. You had to kind of make a joke, keep going, maybe finish up a little quicker. Those things are going to happen. And so, one of the things as an interviewer that I'm always looking for is, do you stay calm under stress? Okay. So another question, when is the appropriate time to ask about salary? That's a great question. Try to put off that salary conversation as long as possible. One of the big things that you're trying to do as the interviewee is, how do you continue to build rapport? And that salary conversation can box you out because maybe you're too high. So, if people bring up salary early on, try to defer that conversation, where you might want to say, look, I'm much more focused right now on finding the right fit and the right role. While salary is important, it's not my biggest driver. And so you can put it off that way. But try to delay that conversation. And you also, one of the things that you can do is you can do some research to see what salary might be. This is always one of the toughest things to find out. But one thing sometimes that can be very helpful with salary would be looking on Glassdoor. So Glassdoor.com is a give and you get. So if you give a little bit of salary information, they'll give you some. So you could put in a company name, you could put in a title or a role, and try to get some salary information. Or you could look in something like a big aggregator like Monster or Indeed, and you could say, well, let's see what roles like that might be paying at other companies to get a ballpark. You could talk with recruiters at other companies to learn a little bit more. Are most large companies using just Zoom as the video platform? What other video platforms may we need to have some experience on? So it does feel like Zoom has really increased dramatically during the pandemic. We had made the decision to move from BlueJeans to Zoom as a video conference platform right before the pandemic, and that's been great. And it feels like that's definitely been the default. I mean, that's the one in particular I'd want everyone to feel comfortable with. And remember, if you don't have a Zoom account, you can get your own Zoom account for free. And it's free to use, one-on-one with another person. And you could even do a group session for free, but they limit you to 40 minutes on the free one. So you can just sign up for your own Zoom account for free and start to practice with it. The other video platforms that I've seen companies use, Microsoft Teams as well. In fact, I'm actually doing something for Microsoft, and so we're going to be using Teams. And so I've seen a lot of companies use Teams for virtual interviews and other things. Skype is used. I've sometimes seen Blue Jeans, which we used to use, not quite as popular, but probably I would say, Zoom, Teams, Skype, sometimes just FaceTime as well, but often people may not feel quite as comfortable because then they're giving out their cell phone number as well. What should I do if my interviewer is running more than 5 minutes late without any communication? Yeah, that happens as well, particularly in a virtual world. I think first thing, I would kind of give them 5 minutes to get on. I think that's, being respectful. But then I think I would email or message them and just to say, hey, I just wanted to check in if the interview is still on. I'm in the, I'm in Zoom in the waiting room right now, but I know we're, a few minutes over, let me know if we're still speaking. But I would generally give about a 5-minute grace period. If the interview pushes the salary conversation, what's the best way to justify your salary requirements, experience, education? That's a great question. And, and one of the things that is important is you can try to defer that conversation, but you may not be able to. You'll often come across, it could be the hiring manager, it could be someone from HR, where they're not really going to push you forward unless they know that you're in sync. You could try to turn around and say, well, what's the range that it's paying, and try to push it back on them. If they're not, one, make sure that you've done some research, and then you've got to make a decision. Do I want to tell them what I'm expecting? And so it could either be, here's what I'm looking to make, could be one of it. So let's say your salary was lower. So I'll give you a great example. I was interviewing for a role several years ago, and my salary was low. I work for a nonprofit, I work in higher ed, and I knew my salary was low, and I did not want to anchor the conversation very low. So when I had to fill out an application, they asked me for my salary. I left it blank. Now, one thing to understand is in a lot of online applications, you may not be able to move forward unless you put something in there. In this case, I put in, happy to discuss at the appropriate time, but I did not put in a number. I didn't want to anchor it low. During the interview, the person said to me, I see that you didn't fill in your salary. And I said, yes, that's right. And I kind of smiled. I didn't say anything. And she said, well, I really need to know your salary. And I said, it's not really that important. I said, you probably value my skills and my experience at a certain point. You're looking for certain skills, certain experiences, and what my current employer pays me shouldn't really have any influence on what you're going to pay. And she said, I may need to come back to that. I said, I'm happy to have the discussion again, but it really shouldn't have any influence. And then I actually asked her what the role was going to pay. And so a couple of things here. I never got a tone in my voice when I said that. I didn't get snarky. I didn't push back. I said it just sort of like as I said it here. And I never had to reveal my salary because it would have anchored it low. Now, there's a couple important caveats, though, in this story. I was interviewing with an employer I used to work for that wanted to hire me back for a bigger role, and they knew I was a proven performer and I had come in with strong recommendations. And two, I was in a role that I liked. This was going to be a difficult role and they were going to have to pay me more. So because I had a good BATNA, a best alternative to a negotiated agreement, I was negotiating from a position of strength and I didn't feel I needed to do that. One other thing to keep in mind, and it depends a little bit where you live, but in certain states and certain municipalities, it is illegal to ask someone their salary. So that is not legal anymore in California. I don't believe it's legal in New York or Massachusetts. I think in DC and Philadelphia as well. So you could check that out as well. And again, you wouldn't want to be snarky in your response, but you may just want to remind them, that's actually not an appropriate question anymore. I use my hands sometimes to talk. Is that distracting? I think that's a great question. I use my hands a lot too, as you can see right now. I don't think it's distracting. I think it's helpful, particularly in a virtual interview, because I think sometimes the challenge in that virtual interview is, how do I convey enthusiasm and energy? And using your hands to talk a little bit can help. Now, you don't want to be flinging them all over where it looks very distracting, but I think it's very normal. And, let's say someone was asking me, what are the top, 3 things that you would bring to AbbVie? I think it's very normal that you might go, well, 1 is this, and 2 is this, and 3 is that. So I think that that's a very normal thing. When is it a good time to ask about a company's COVID-19 workplace adaptations? It's a great question. Again, that's interesting. You could put it off to later. I wouldn't lead with that. I think I would lead more with, learning more about the company and the role, why you're a good fit. But then it may be time towards the end of the interview to ask about that, or maybe more in a second interview. Are people working remotely, and what are you thinking about in terms of coming back to the office? For so many companies and organizations, this has been a evolving story where they're going to have a plan and they're going to have 5 different scenarios that change 34 times a day. But I think it's a fair question to ask in terms of when are they coming back. One more question. This is a great question. How should you end a virtual interview? It's great. So whether it's virtual or whether it's in person, I really want people to do 4, so there's my hand again, 4 things at the end of the interview. And, the first one is 1, thank me. Just thank me for spending the time with you and getting to know you and taking the time. 2, reiterate your interest in the role. So it could be, I'm really excited about this company and I'm really excited about this role, and why, about the team. It could be the team, it could be the product, it could be the role you're doing. 3, tell them how you're going to hit the ground running. I've already got experience doing digital advertising, doing blank, 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 blank. And I've led teams of 5 to 6 people, which is about your team size. And I'm very familiar with your product. And then 4, ask about next steps. If they've already told you the next steps and preempted that question, you can skip it. One thing I think that's really important is, I think people really often skip the close of the interview. And so you really want to close out the interview and you really want to sell. Don't think about sell as a bad 4-letter word. It's a way to show your interest and to communicate that. And so close that interview. Tell me why you're excited. Take 30 seconds. Don't feel like you've got to do this in 5 seconds. It can be 30 to 40 seconds, but in the end, I'm going to hire the person who wants to be there the most. So I know we're coming up. I know we had about 15 minutes of Q&A. Any last questions before we wrap up? Okay, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and welcome you to Athlete Launch. And we should have more webinars coming up in the near future. Thanks, everyone.